Well, we have 3 o'clock here on the East Coast, and welcome everyone to our workforce webinar today. Thank you very much for joining us for today's event. My name is Nicole Parker, and I'm currently the Director of U.S. Outreach for the Journal of Science Policy and Governance. For those of you unfamiliar with the journal, I want to provide a brief background. So we're going to put our website in the chat. Just to give you a few high-level points about our journal, we're an internationally recognized open access peer-reviewed publication. We cover every corner of science and technology policy. Through the journal, we bolster research and writing credentials for early career scholars in science policy and encourage them to engage in the policy discourse and debate. We publish op-eds, technology assessments, policy memos, analyses, white papers, book reviews, workshop proceedings, and other research articles. We also promote the publications through our global mailing list and events such as workshops, webinars such as these, and a podcast where we interview our published authors. You can follow JSPG on all the socials, on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. We also have a YouTube channel where we post all our recordings, and we'll post today's recording as well. If you want to follow us, we'll post a few of our accounts in the chat, and you can also link to our newsletter where you can keep up to date with our future events. So I want to call attention to the reason why we are all here today. Last month, the Journal of Science Policy and Governance and Sigma Chi launched a call for op-eds and policy position papers, inviting students, postdocs, policy fellows, and early career researchers to consider ways we can re-envision STEM education and workforce development in the 21st century. And there's currently a submission deadline of January 23rd, 2022. So this webinar is the first of 3 webinars that we will engage with thought leaders in the field to discuss the most important topics for the next generation to focus on. We'll showcase impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on the field and design the future of this field from a policy standpoint, taking into account equity and inclusion, access to technology, and aligning training opportunities with workforce demands. We encourage you to use your social media to tweet about the webinar and tag us. And whoever has the most tweets, we may lean on you to share your impressions with us for our future blog post on this event. This webinar specifically will focus on supporting K-12 students to enter higher education as a stepping stone into the STEM workforce, and creating pathways for K-12 students to enter the STEM workforce by providing experiential learning opportunities. The webinar was organized in collaboration with Advancing Research Impact in Society, ARIS, and thank you for that. And so with that introduction, we can move into today's event. So if you're not speaking, we do ask that you please mute and turn off your video, and then I will move into introductions. So today we have a panel discussion with distinguished leaders in the STEM K-12 space. This panel will be moderated by Thomas Tubon, Chief Workforce Development Officer for the Bioindustrial Manufacturing and Design Ecosystem, BioMADE, Manufacturing Innovation Institute. Dr. Tubon leads the education and workforce development initiatives of the BioMADE Manufacturing Innovation Institute with a specific focus on bioindustrial manufacturing and synthetic biology. Dr. Tubon has also served as a co-PI on the NSF ATE Innovate Bio Center for Biotechnology Education and the NSF Advancing Research Impact in Society Center Leadership Team for Workforce Development and Strategic Partnerships. Dr. Tubon holds a PhD in molecular genetics from Stony Brook University and Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory, and a BS in molecular biology from San Diego State University. Right now, we're going to place all of our panelists' social medias in our chat. So please follow the panelists and their wonderful organizations. And during this panel discussion, please feel free to ask any questions for the speakers by placing them in the chat, and you can send them directly to me or Adriana Bankston through the private chat. And with that, I will turn it over to Tom.
Nicole, thank you so much for a generous introduction. It really is an honor to be here today, to be part of this important discussion with everyone here. We have a distinguished panel of experts on board today, and I am just I'm just absolutely beside myself with the folks that we have on board. We're pleased to have Dr. Natalie Kuldell. She's the Executive Director for BioBuilder, Dr. Teshell, Ponteen, the STEM Manufacturing and Design Coach for FHI 360, and Dr. Linnea Fletcher. She's the Executive Director for the NSF Advanced Tech Ed Innovate Bio National Center for Biotechnology. Each of our panels have dedicated their entire lives' work and countless hours to working to create growth opportunities for students in the sciences. Panelists, welcome. And I'm hoping that you can elaborate a little bit and just give us a deeper insight into your educational background and your experience working with K-12 and STEM and career pathways. So we'll start with Natalie and then go to Linnea and Teshell.
Sure. Thank you, Tom. It's great to be here. I love this panel, the panelists. So thank you for inviting me. I am a scientist by training. I had the really good fortune of doing scientific research when I was a high school student because I lived in Washington, D.C. and could join the National Institutes of Health for a summer internship, thanks to the American Red Cross, actually. And I really felt like the way we did science in the NIH was very different from how I was learning science as a high school student. And I think that the rest of my career has really been dedicated to closing that gap a little bit and trying to find ways to teach science that are closer to the way we actually do science. I have gone on to Cornell chemistry and then Harvard Medical School for my PhD and postdoc, but got the lucky chance to teach at Wellesley College after my postdoc and realized that as much as I love research, I truly love teaching and now can bridge the research and my notions about how to teach and welcome people into science. And I do that now through BioBuilder, which is the nonprofit that I lead as the executive director.
Thank you, Natalie. I'm going to turn this one over to Linnea. Linnea, please.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this panel. I really appreciate it. I got my PhD in microbiology at the University of Texas at Austin, but my real love in science started with the fact that I did 3 undergraduate research experiences at the University of California. And I only endured lecture because I knew I had to do well in my classes. All I wanted to do was be in lab and do things with my hands. And after I got my PhD, I did 2 more postdocs, but I really realized that teaching was my passion. And I wanted to teach people who didn't necessarily understand science the way I did. As Natalie said, I really loved research and I felt like this was the best way to get people to see the beauty of science. So I decided to go off to a community college. And at the community college, there is no entry. It's not like 15% of the top high school, it's everybody. And this was an opportunity to share science with everybody who maybe didn't think that science was for them. And as part of that, I got involved with working with high schools because I couldn't figure out why high school students didn't know science the way I did, and they weren't involved with research. And so my very first grant was a grant to educate both pre-service and in-service teachers in research and how to do biotechnology. And from that point on, I realized my passion was going to be to share science as I did science in graduate school and in undergraduate research. And so that's what I've been doing in all the NSF grants that I've had from the National Science Foundation, is to make sure that high school students and college students get to experience science the way it's supposed to be. And that's not in a book. It's in a lab or it's out in the field. So through Innovate Bio, that's what we try to do, is to reach people across the nation and educate people for our workforce, but really show them how great biotechnology can be at showing them all the different things that can be done in this world with biology.
Thanks, Linnea. And I'm going to turn this now over to Teshell. Oh, Teshell, I think you're muted.
Awesome. Thank you for having me here today. My name is Teshell Ponteen Greenen. Like the other panelists, I do have a background in STEM. So I have a Bachelor's of Science in Chemistry from Pace University in New York City. I had summer internship experiences and lab experience with my mentor. That paved the way for me to earn my PhD. So I have my PhD in pharmacology. It was a great time being a graduate student. There was opportunities to teach. So I realized at the time that I had a passion to help people learn. And so in undergrad, there were struggles around my classroom and how to answer questions, so there's always those standardized testing. So I'm not someone who tests very well on standardized testing. And so I wanted to change that trajectory for a lot of students, especially students of color like myself. I'm a first-generation college student. I'm also an immigrant. So I was born and raised on the beautiful island of St. Kitts in the Caribbean. So it's just trying to figure out how to navigate that path as a person who's coming to the US for the first time and going to high school. So trying to figure out how I can give opportunities for other students who are like myself, might not know about scholarships, might not know about internships, might not know what some of the other pathways to STEM are for them. And so that drove my passion to go into education. I went to Virginia Commonwealth University. I did a postdoctoral fellowship by NIH. So it allows research scientists to go into the lab and also teach. So I had the opportunity to go to several universities in Virginia, work with students, learn about pedagogy, interactive learning, all of those amazing things that we try to drive in education. And from there, taught. So I was in the classroom for quite some time, applied those techniques in the classroom, and then went on to the National Science Foundation. So I was a AAAS fellow, that's the American Association for the Advancement of Science, Science and Technology Policy Fellowship. I did that at the National Science Foundation for 2 years and wanted to just implement programs. So now I'm at FHI 360, where I get to take a lot of my knowledge in content creation, evaluation, and just apply it to how we develop and implement programs. So thank you for the opportunity to come and speak to so many of you.
Thanks, Teshell. As you can see, our panelists have a very, very rich background, rich history, and definitely investment in growing our STEM talent pool. So while there are many, many facets that serve K-12 pathways to STEM education and workforce development, some of those are going to be very specific to your position and experience. So today, what we're going to do is we're going to focus on 3 main aspects of this work. And we're going to look at the structure, programs, and resources that facilitate the participation of folks in STEM pathways. We're going to look at the development and implementation of programs and challenges, and then take a deeper dive into perspectives on policies that impact STEM career pathways for the workforce. Importantly, how we take this information and collect it in today's discussion is going to be really, really important for us to precipitate these ideas into scientific communication and to use this information to effectively communicate through authoring articles and publications that impact science policy. So without further ado, let's jump into the first set of questions. And again, I'm thankful to have you all on board, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to help lead this discussion. So Natalie, I'm going to turn it to you first, and just in very short order, what's your role and responsibilities in the organization that you're with right now?
I am toe-to-toe with the chaos of every day. I am the founder and the executive director of a nonprofit. It has launched out of MIT in the Department of Biological Engineering, taking the teaching that I was doing there and trying to make it just widely available. We would like this to be in every classroom and available to every student. So I have a hand in developing the curricula. I have a hand in training the teachers. I have a hand in hiring the program directors and teaching fellows who deliver the content to students and teachers. We've been developing online programs, so I do a lot of recording. I do career conversations. I do compensation packages for my employees. I have a never dull kind of day every day. It has been a tremendous challenge. I learn a lot running a nonprofit organization, and I love it. I absolutely love it. We are almost 10 years old, and I hope we make it to 100, and I get to see it all.
So Natalie, I think this is a general question for everyone. I don't know how you all get sleep, because I'm imagine that the rest of these responses are going to be equally as dizzying with the amount of work everyone's engaged with. So Linnea, tell us a little bit about your role and responsibilities with Innovate Bio.
Great. So Innovate Bio is funded by the National Science Foundation, and being the National Biotechnology Education Center, our responsibility essentially is serving over 160 two-year biotech programs in the nation, plus over 90 high school programs that specialize in biotech, and then the four-year schools that articulate with these schools, plus all of the trade organizations like Bio, and all of the industry that we create a workforce for. Now, we focus on technicians, but I will tell you, after 25 years of having a national center, I was part of the first national center, and now I'm leading the second national center. And I have a fairly good size leadership team that represents all of the nation. So from Seattle to North Carolina to Puerto Rico to Massachusetts, and then having international contacts, because biotechnology is global. And it's a very large term, which means that we have to stay abreast of emerging trends in agriculture, industrial biomanufacturing, to pharmaceutical. And you can imagine we've been very busy this past year trying to serve our teachers with the fact that they're doing so much of their teaching virtually. And it's fairly impossible to educate somebody who's supposed to be working at a bench when they only can do virtual teaching. So we've been doing a lot of work with our teachers. And on top of that, staying on track for COVID, we've also been working on a lot of the new emerging trends, which is industrial biotechnology and a lot of cell therapy. And to those ends, we have to keep track of the career path all the way from middle school up through community college and then on to postgraduate work. So it's a large network. We serve as a networking organization. And yes, we do get involved with policy, because policy means change. And we want to make sure that this is a seamless transition for students. And if we don't do a good job of creating a diverse workforce, this is more important than ever. We will not have the innovation or the number of people to fill these positions.
Those are all excellent points, Linnea, and thank you for sharing. Teshell, tell us a little bit about your role and responsibilities in your current position.
So as I mentioned previously, I'm at FHI 360. We're a nonprofit. We're based in North Carolina. I work outside of the Washington, D.C. office. So I'm part of the National Institute for Work and Learning, where we look at education and workforce. So how do we provide access to underserved groups into getting into those areas. So specifically, I support the college and career readiness team around bringing those STEM access to students, whether it's students who are from racial minorities, those involved with the justice system, first generation college students. And as we know, those are in areas of recognized policy. So how do we broaden participation for students in those fields? And so really, one of the other things that I do is work with organizations, including Johnson & Johnson, so private companies, public organizations, district schools, providing technical support and assistance to their employees around building capacity. So how can we engage the private sector and all of these individuals around showcasing to students STEM professional, what it means to be someone in STEM, what it means to walk the walk, how can we share our stories with students and so forth. So what I do is give technical assistant, do content creation, help them to organize their events. From time to time, I do lead live sessions with students. So we have a program called a Bridge to Employment program with Johnson & Johnson that I've previously done an ice cream social. So I get to do a lot of different things in my day-to-day role in supporting students as they transition into this field. As I mentioned previously, also working with like the juvenile justice system. So we work with some organizations with district schools on how they can connect that pathway for those who might have been involved with the juvenile justice system. So those are just a few of the things that I do, and I'm more than happy to talk about more of it.
That's a pretty extensive list, Teshell. Thank you for sharing. So what we have here is a representation of a variety of different approaches to address STEM engagement in K-12. We heard workshops, we heard ice cream socials, curriculum development pieces. So all of these are coming together, and there's opportunities that are being created, but it's still not enough. And we know that because we need to really put those resources in the right places. So my question for all of you is, when you have these great programs and you're doing the good work, there's a part of it where you have to consider where the funding is coming from and how are you supporting what you need to do. So my question then is how are your K-12 programs funded and supported? How are you getting the resources to do this? And I'm asking that with a slight twist on the importance of policy to ensure that some of these agencies or funding sources are supported. So let's start with Linnea. How are you supporting your work with K-12 engagement?
So I'll start with a good example. So my very first National Science Foundation grant, where I was educating pre-service and in-service teachers in Texas and starting a biotechnology program. So realizing that part of NSF's goals are to make your program sustainable, what I did is I immediately thought of what organizations within the state could make this happen. Because I knew that once the grant ended, this would all go away unless it was adopted. And so one thing we do, we work really hard to make sure that all of the organizations we're working with, we address their needs and their interests. So that included the teachers, the state organizations that are involved with education, and the school superintendents, of course, the students. So we made sure that all of them would get what they needed at the same time we were meeting our goals. So what I did is first I asked the teachers, so if you don't know anything and we're going to educate you to know everything that you need to know in biotech, how many years will it take? And they said 5. And I said, well, good. Then in 5 years, you'll be a mentor. So we established that the teachers, once we educated them, would be mentors themselves. So that solved the problem about the fact who was going to continue the mentoring. And then we looked at the state agencies and what were the funding sources, and it was CTE. And so we aligned our programs, our biotech program, with what the state needed to educate people in biotechnology. So that's how we do sustainability and support, is that we try to make sure all of our partners are getting what they need. And at the same time, we're doing the best by the students. So I just wanted to give you that one example. And now we take that example and we try to do that with all the states that we are working with and involve industry, education, students, and teachers at the same time.
So Linnea, just to be clear, I know that you had mentioned we several times. Having known you for many, many years, the we actually means I or me. And I know that a lot of these initiatives are individuals and the advocates. And so I want to give you that credit and for the good work that you've done to support.
Well, you know, one thing I wanted to say as part of it's really important to listen to people and hear what they're saying if you want them all to work together. And when I first started to work with the teachers, the very first thing they said to me is, we don't need you to tell us how to teach. You just tell us what we need to teach. So listening carefully to the teachers and then also the students, then you know the best way to serve the situation.
Excellent advice. So in addition to engaging your federal government agencies and your state government, interactions with industries are really, really important in getting these things funded and getting the monies. So when I turn to industry, I'm going to turn to Teshell because you had mentioned Johnson & Johnson and initiatives that are supported there. Can you elaborate just a little bit about the funding, support, and how things are sustained in a different model system?
Yeah, and so with the Johnson & Johnson work that my team does, we have collaboration with other organizations. So we work with the Smithsonian Science Education, we work with Junior Achievement, we also work with Girl Scouts. So it's a network of organizations who are working in STEM and STEM education, but also have access to the participants. So our goal is to reach girls all across the globe. So we take advantage of using those organizations to give us access to those girls, essentially. So it's J&J coming alongside with these organizations to support. As Linnea said, you know, we have to be concerned about the participants as well as what we're putting into the program. So from my standpoint, I work directly with J&J employees around how to implement those programs on the ground. So what does it look like to connect with a district school? What does it look like to plan a virtual event? What does it look like to engage with a museum in a different country? What does it look like to host an International Women's Day panel? So it's all of those things, listening to what they're asking for and using a logic model, of course, so that kind of guides what are the outcomes, what are the expected outcomes for this program. So we're able to use that collectively with all of those organizations to make sure we're getting our end product, essentially. So you know, it allows us to build that capacity, like I mentioned earlier, for those employees on how to engage students. And I know this is another national interest around policy. How can you connect students with employers in the workforce for internship opportunities? So it opens the door for so many things to happen for students. So we support Johnson & Johnson. We have other organizations that we work with, such as through the Department of Labor and Department of Justice. So there are other projects. We go after grants, essentially, like Linnea and Natalie's, the National Science Foundation, and so forth. But definitely engaging the private sector is important. I will push that.
So we'll circle back around to industry engagement and some of the partnerships in just a short bit. Natalie, I'm going to volley it over to you because I'm interested where your funding comes from and how do you support BioBuilder to do the good work that you do?
Yeah, I'll echo the wisdom of the two panelists who spoke before me. We also started with National Science Foundation funding from the ERC, a large grant called SINBERC. About halfway through, the NSF asked, well, what are you going to do to sustain this once the grant goes away? The answer that I came up with was start a nonprofit. Had I had any idea what that actually meant, I might have come up with a different answer, but having a nonprofit seemed like a smart way to sustain the work we were doing with the NSF because it allowed for us to engage with philanthropic donors for whom the work we do is well aligned. It allows us to engage with grant making and foundation organizations to try to build in either initiatives or ongoing sort of operational support. There are grants, and then we also have revenue generating programming. So we have been fortunate to publish a book called BioBuilder. It teaches synthetic biology and how to do that in a laboratory setting. The ideas of bringing engineering into biology, if you'd like to teach life science through an engineer's lens. And so there's books, there's kits. We have 2 teaching labs in Massachusetts, one in Cambridge and one that will be opening very, very soon inside of Ginkgo Bioworks, an industry partner. So engagement with industry also helps us tremendously. If they see that what we are doing is going to prepare the students for the jobs that this industry partner will need, we can work collaboratively to in our case, establish a teaching space that will allow us to train those students to then be prepared to be part of either, college experiences or skilled workforce that industry is looking for.
Thanks, Natalie. I think that you highlighted a couple of things I think everyone on the panel just did about industry partnerships and the importance of public-private partnerships. These are drivers for progress and for resource development, all of the things that at the very end of each one of our days, we can say are contributing to the ability to serve our students better, to get people into the workforce, and to really focus in on how do we address certain groups and certain populations. In this case, we're talking about K-12 engagement. So thank you again for the good work that you all do and for continuing to serve our students in our industries and getting people into these really great positions. So I'm going to switch it up a little bit because I want to focus on the policy. So we've heard a little bit about what you all are doing, and there's no question that you guys are bringing a very, very strong background, experience, and expertise into this scenario. And so as I resolve the remainder of our session here, we're going to focus in on some of the policies. And I want to pick your brains about these policies that may be constraining. And so, Teshell, what are the policies currently constraining STEM education and training that you visualize across the globe? So not just in the United States and our nation, but worldwide. And then how can we increase access to education through more equitable policy development?
Yes, and so earlier I talked about being born in the Caribbean and having to come to the US and standardize testing. So I think for me, that stands out the most as one of the biggest constraints, not just in K-12, but all across higher education. And by that, what I mean is, we're asking students to be tested in a particular way, but that doesn't reflect what we do in the workforce, right? We're asking them to apply skills in a different way around critical thinking and conceptualizing responses and so on to help solve problems and drive solutions, but that's not what we're doing in the classroom. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges. And so from my standpoint, we need to find ways to engage more in hands-on learning and conceptual learning and critical thinking for K-12 students. So how do we get them to that space of problem solving and really seeing that STEM is a part of a global network? We're solving problems that are globally, but also within the community, right? So I think we want to help to support things around that so that it's not just a single test. You have to conceptualize the responses to those. And I think even as we transition into college and professional schools, that we need to convey the same message, right? So I mentioned previously that I was a biology professor. So I'm speaking from my experience in the classroom with students around memorizing concepts. But again, that's not how we're training them when you're in the medical field or in engineering. It's solving problems. So for me, that means like colleges and universities, we need to think about how to adapt different types of teaching styles. So whether it's integrating peer-led team learning, or hybrid classroom flip models, we've seen a lot of that with the COVID-19 challenge. So it's given that opportunity for students to build on those skills that they can transfer into the workforce, as well as integrate opportunities for them to connect with industry partners and internships and so on. So for me, that's one that stands out. I can add more. There's another one around teachers. We've heard a lot about teachers, so pre-service and in-service teachers. How are we preparing them to be able to work with the students? So we know that students that engage with teachers over 80% of the time is how they're learning science. But a lot of teachers do not have a background in STEM like us, the panelists here. So how about creating dual pathways for students who are pursuing STEM to have an education path? A lot of times we find on university campuses, the education department is not speaking to the biology department or the chemistry department. So how do we provide those paths for students who are interested in STEM to become educators? And then for in-service teachers, it's thinking about professional development training. So instead of, we have workshops for them, which is great, but how do we build other fellowship programs? And I know there's the Albert Einstein educator program that allows some to go into policy. So just providing some of those constraints. And I'll turn it back over to you. As again, I can there's so many. I can keep
Oh.
talking, but definitely want to give the others a chance to
So
say.
you definitely had a good list of touch points here, everything from different modalities of learning to different programs that are out there. You know, I'm going to expand this out just a little bit, because oftentimes in education, just because you have something available doesn't mean that it's utilized appropriately.
Mhm.
And I'll give you one example for universal design for learning. We all know the value of UDL, and it is an important thing to integrate into education. But yet, not very many people are doing this. And so when we talk about equitable policy development, you know, is there a transition between these types of things where, you know, something is a guideline versus something is implemented and expected? So those are the kind of things I think that we're going to struggle with as educators, and definitely an area of policy which needs some attention there. And so, Linnea and Natalie, do you have any additional comments that you would like to bring to that discussion,
Well, I will quickly say that when I went from biology to biotech education, I really felt as though I finally found this is how education should be done. So the rule of thumb for us in biotech, and I think it could be applied to other STEM areas, all education should be authentic. Don't have students just do math, do applied math. Our students in biotech, they make solutions. And when they make a solution that's going to be used later. Then we have students who are doing industry-based projects, or they're working in the incubator that we have at a community college, and they're working for startup companies. So they know what they're doing is authentic and it means something and they're responsible for it and it leads to a product. Or I have high school students making products in a supply chain that are going to be used in the middle school. So why can't we get middle school kids making a product that's going to be used in elementary school? Students like to do authentic work. They resent doing education that produces nothing and it's just thrown away at the end of the day. Don't ever do that to students. And don't make teachers do that either, because teachers feel the same way. And one other thing, emphasize mastery. Why are we doing labs and we only do it in a certain time frame and students don't get to master it? So they feel like their education is a waste. It's a joke. And, you know, in our workforce programs, when they do biotech and they don't master it in that hour, they get to do open lab until they master it. They know what they're doing is going to lead to something, whether it's a job or they're going to go off to a four-year school and work in a lab. So make sure that education is authentic. Yeah, I feel strongly about that.
So, Linnea, I think I know what it feels like to be a student in your classroom. I think I just learned quite a bit here from your response. Natalie, any insights into how we can increase access to education through more equitable policy development? Any sense about how to
more equitable policy development? Well, I mean, I think COVID has really opened the lens on how much our educational system is responsible for in terms of the lives of our students and the families that support those students. So school is not just the reading, writing, arithmetic. It is also the food security, the ability that the parents have to go on to work. It is also the eyes on students who might be in vulnerable and in dangerous situations. So I think that, you know, the appreciation that education is trying to do so very many things right now. It feels like all the really hard problems have been left to the school. Right? It's like, I don't know how else we're going to solve the food insecurity problem. So let's just make sure that the kids can eat at school. So, I mean, I am imagining that if we really could start from scratch, we might not have all of those responsibilities falling into the school system, and that schools may really be able to have the breathing room and the trust that it would take to carry out the kind of education that Linnea was talking about and the kinds of experiences that Teshell was mentioning, the authenticity, the application of knowledge, the patience that we would have with students to work with them until they have mastery over some material. I think it is very hard to do when we are asking schools to do so many other things in addition. So that may be a somewhat generic answer to a very specific question, but to me, I think teasing those apart, this is an opportunity, given what we have seen. Our responsibility is that we're putting into the school systems.
So Natalie, myself, being a teacher and also a parent, the COVID-19, if there's a silver lining on anything, it's that COVID-19 really highlighted how much teachers are needed and the role that teachers play. When you try to homeschool your kids, or you're trying to balance everything out on top of work and everything, it is an absolute circus. So definitely the impact of COVID and the pandemic for exposing some of these things and bringing it out to the attention of the American people, I think has been really important. There's a flip side to that, and that is how do we deal with this? And I think that this is one of the more interesting questions. Linnea, I'm gonna turn it over to you to ask this question, and this is about COVID-19. So since we opened up this door, I'll walk down the path. How has the COVID-19 pandemic exposed and exacerbated educational inadequacies and inequities for students in STEM disciplines? And I'm going to prime this a little bit, because a lot of the students in STEM, whether it is in automotive or whether it is in welding, or some of these areas that really lean on hands-on experiences, how has COVID changed and impacted those types of instructional capabilities?
Well, the one thing the center had to do within 2 weeks of hearing 2 teachers talk about how they couldn't figure out how to teach virtually what was supposed to be face-to-face, we started to do a workshop for both high school teachers and then community college teachers. And at our own school, our school, having to go virtual, literally gave out computers to students who didn't have computers, and then opened up the parking lot so they could use the internet. Which this is not a long-term solution, because people don't want to be in a parking lot using the internet, but that was what we had to do at the moment in time. And then we moved on to other possibilities where people were doing biology that was in their kitchen. Companies to provide kits for this. Plus the fact that our community college also ended up reducing our class size by half, and then having people come back face to face, but with masks on. Many schools just totally shut down and weren't producing any people for a job, where other community colleges like ours were actually doing it, but they were losing money, where they were cutting the class in half. So COVID definitely showed the inequalities in terms of resources that are available for students, and this has to be fixed. Many of these resource inequalities were not known. Well, now they're known and they need to be fixed. And then 2, we do have to be more flexible in how we do face-to-face or hands-on. The idea of kits that people could do in their kitchen and still be ready for workforce is not unreasonable. And this could be virtual reality, maybe expand on this so they could simulate what a workplace is like and being able to do this at home. And then flexibility between credit and non-credit. This always drives me crazy. I have students who work in industry. Why shouldn't they get credit for what they're learning in industry? And that translates then into degrees. So more translation between credit, non-credit, more flexibility in how people can gain degrees and certifications and be recognized from what they know. I think I gave a lot of different examples all at once.
I think that what we're hearing here, whether it's response to COVID or whether we're talking about equitable policy development, there are a lot of writing points, a lot of points that the general public may not necessarily be informed about. And I'm taking the example to the next level with COVID. With COVID, no one really understood what exactly a teacher's role is. And now I would argue that the majority of the folks in the United States, if you have kids, you know what a teacher does. And it's a difficult job. Oh,
and
go ahead,
I just want to say, Tom, is that a really good teacher meets each student on their ground. No matter how big the class size is, you have to figure out how to meet each student on their ground. You have to know what they're facing in their life to be able to do a good job teaching. And Natalie is right. A lot of this, of taking care of kids, has fallen on the education system, and we do have to figure out better support systems.
So all very, very good points. And I think that what I'm hearing uniformly from our panelists is that there are a lot of issues that need attention, and a lot of resources that are not available when you talk about, helping students make that transition. The focus of the panel is on addressing our K-12 students and getting them into the workforce. And there are some fundamental problems on the very front end. All of these can be identified and binned and addressed, but it just takes that hard work to bring it out to the awareness of the public. And I think this is where it's really important to think about how you can frame this up. And for the folks who are listening to this as part of our session, how do you frame this up in a way that increases our ability to communicate and get this language down, so that folks who aren't savvy about the technology, or they're not savvy about what it is that we need, they can understand it, and they can understand it to the point where it creates action. So this is going to lead into the next question, and I'll leave this open to any one of you guys who want to give this a shot. And this is the policies. And so what kind of policies do you think would best support students in STEM disciplines in the preparation for the future workforce in the changing job market? This could be as a result of the pandemic. Pandemic exposed a lot of different things, but in general, what can be done? Where do you see the primary focus point for addressing policies? What do you guys see? Teshell?
So I wanted to speak for those who are marginalized. I think for me, COVID kind of heightened that there is a digital divide for those students. So not having access or like financial burden on their parents, right? So we have to consider those students who might in the future fall behind because of these things, right? So we know a lot of students didn't have support systems in place. Like if you don't financially have the money to have a tutor, then you don't have access to those things. So these students are now falling behind. So for me, I see a space where we have to be proactive about targeting those students further down the line. So even like our English language learners, like that's a minority community who would further fall even more behind. So I think that's a great area to consider some policy work. And then the financial strain. We know a lot of minority students are not going into like the technical workforce, even if it's a certificate program, because they don't have the money. So how can we provide more access financially to these students, as well as offering computers, like Linnea said, they were in their parking lot and so on. But what do we do now moving forward for those students? And then thinking in the sense of if they have an experiential learning opportunity. For me, I'm wondering, what does that really mean for them to connect to the workforce in terms of what is it counted for? So if a student is being admitted to college, is that counted based on if they had a virtual experience and so on? So it's really looking around what constitutes admissions. I think some of those things even have to change at the higher education level. Mm-hmm. It's just a lot. It's a lot that could be unveiled. And so hopefully those are some ideas that I had in my mind.
So I like those ideas. And I just want to expand that just out a little bit. We're very concerned about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And a lot of the times when we're talking about education and equity, we focus on various groups. And I just want to bring to the attention the entire scope of what folks oftentimes miss when they think about DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. Populations out there that are in desperate need for assistance and for help. We're talking about folks that are, they're neurodiverse groups, persons with disabilities, You have rural populations and folks that are stuck in that digital divide that don't have access to the internet. And so there are a number of different populations that are out there. And it's very easy for us as educators to come out and say, you know, these are things that we do, and we're always excited about the solutions that we provide. But then the harder problems that are out there, like how do we solve these issues of accessibility? How do we solve these? How do we provide those resources? Those are kind of areas that I envision bringing to the attention of so many people that just kind of sweep it away. And so I'm going to jump around here just a little bit, because I know we're talking a lot about the issues that arise, and especially those that have been revealed as a result of COVID. I'm going to ask you the harder question, which is, now that you've identified or maybe discussed a lot of these different issues, what are the potential solutions that you can recommend? You know, how can we approach this? And you know, think about students who are in this call that are interested in writing about policy-based solutions. So what can we do? And so I'm tapping your expertise and I'm channeling it right back to you guys. Natalie, what do you think?
I think it was said earlier, teachers have tremendous wisdom, right? There is incredible local savvy and an appreciation for what will work within local communities. And I think that if we really trusted teachers and empowered teachers to teach the students in a way that is meaningful to the students and sensible to the students that they have in front of them every day, I think I guess said another way, and maybe more succinctly, there cannot be a one-size-fits-all answer to this, right? There are so many different needs in different communities and among different factions. That said, what I don't want to happen is to have the orange juice for some and orange aid for others. That is to say, you know, that computer science education in an affluent community might be learning to program in Python, whereas in a poor community or rural community, it means using an Excel spreadsheet, right? That is not fair, right? And so there has to be, I think, a maybe triangulation between quality educational resources, empowerment of teachers, and then I think policy that liberates, like Teshell was saying, if we are holding people to some tests that they are taking over and over, or have to take, I'm just going to use another colloquial, you can't fatten the pig if you keep weighing it, right? You know, you have to take your foot off the gas a little bit in terms of measuring progress all the time in order to really try things that are going to make progress in a longer term. So I think it is a complicated balance between all of those things, which may be why this is a difficult and suitable challenge, right? It's not an easy fix for sure, or else it would be fixed.
Definitely a tremendous challenge. Linnea, you're, in my experience knowing you, a problem solver. And so I'm going to tap also into your perspectives on how you envision maybe some of the potential solutions, you know, whether it's through engaging policymakers or, you know, how are you envisioning changing the narrative here in a way that, yeah.
I can give some examples, because I felt like COVID, maybe this isn't the right word to say, but was also an opportunity to see how virtual education could be an advantage. So one good example, we discovered speed networking. Speed networking is where you get employees from biotech to talk to students. And we couldn't do it face-to-face, but then we could do it across the country. And my students in Austin talked to employees at BioRad in San Francisco, and realizing that we could set up an event where rural community colleges who have no industry, or maybe students who don't have access to hear. And these are employees, and people need to realize in biotech, it's young employees in biomanufacturing or in the lab, and they listen to rock music while they're working, and they're just like everybody else across the nation. I think people have the wrong idea what a scientist looks like. We don't run around, always in lab coats and look really strict and all this. We're just normal people. And students from all over the nation could hear what a scientist or someone who looks just like them is doing in a lab. And this is virtually, and we would have never known that if it hadn't been for the pandemic and we had to do everything virtually. So one thing I think people need to think about possibilities as a result of the pandemic and expand on them and provide those kind of opportunities to individuals that no longer could or can't access them. The other thing is the pandemic and then also made us have to form better networks with industry. So why don't we involve industry more in helping with some of our students? Industry wants to help with it. The report just put out by the Coalition for State Bioscience Institutes indicates that industry is and wants to do more in education for students and with students. And this is untapped. Why doesn't policy essentially promote that idea where we can work more with industry and people? So we want to do more with our alumni who are just graduating students. I just feel like we need to do more networking. We should take advantage more of the networks that many of them that were formed as a result of the pandemic or not, but we need to do more of this and bring more into working with the support of education.
So I'm going to unpack that a little bit because
I go wild.
One of the things that I want to point out, and we won't have time to comment on this, but I think that it's the flip side of the coin. So you had mentioned that internet-based resources and distance learning and the importance of this has really come out as an area that we need to focus in on. Now, a lot of that's been built out and we still have a lot more to do, but at the same time, it also reveals part of the huge divide that's out there for people that are in rural areas that don't have internet, or people are still using dial-up. We're in the new millennia, and many of our students who are out there in these remote areas still are relying on archaic internet resources. And so these are the kind of things that really I want to highlight in terms of deficits, but it's a two sides to the coin type thing. So it's rounding out to the very top of the hour. I want to ask one more question, and then I would like the audience out there to think about any questions that they would like to ask our panelists so that we can leverage their expertise and their experience at this time that we have together. So if you have any questions, please do enter them into the chat box, and we'll pass them on to our presenters. So here's a question for you guys to round out my session with you guys. So how is our system of STEM education and workforce development adapted to the current pandemic? And Linnea, you had mentioned, we're doing these things with online learning and so on and so forth. But what are some of the lessons learned and policy improvements that are needed to better adapt to future pandemics? So this is not the last time this is going to happen. And so how can we be better prepared? What kind of things are we thinking about? And I'll leave this open to anyone of you all that would like to address that question.
So I'll just piggyback off of what Linnea said. I think for me, it's looking at how we build those alliances to enhance the opportunities for students. So we had to do the same, where now it brought new ideas around how can I connect employees who, for example, are in China with a student who is in the US or in Latin America. So it builds opportunities for students to see others who look like themselves, and supports building like their STEM identity. We need role models, we need mentors. So I think when we bring in industry partners, with higher ed and K-12 that we see those opportunities. For me, it's also thinking about how the business partners could actually go to like schools as well, so how can they engage with the students more in the schools, whether it's in hands-on demonstrations or having like science fairs. So those types of things that spark their enchantment and could say, hey, I'm an engineer, I'm a biologist, or whatever the STEM profession is. So I think we really need to look at how we can strengthen and build those alliances, and also provide internships and especially financial need. I talked about this earlier, in that so many students cannot get access also because of money. It's about funding. What scholarships do we have? What fellowships? What internships do we have? So I think alliances around that. And one of the things that I'll highlight also is, for me personally, I've been part of like NSF and the policy fellowship space. So I think we need to give teachers and educators and STEM professional a voice at the table to be able to come and say these things. Mm-hmm. So for me, I'm no longer in the classroom. I get to see some of this through the work that I'm doing, but it's great to hear from the educators. We want to know what is happening in the classroom. Why is it not working? So we need to find other pathways to give them a voice. There's a AAAS fellowship, as I mentioned, the Albert Einstein Fellowship. There's so many others, but we need to create more avenues, more pathways for them to work with the policy advisors, essentially, and those who are making the policies. So I just wanted to add those two things there.
Great opportunities to increase visibility and also to raise awareness of some of these very, very important issues. Linnea and Natalie, do you have any policy improvement suggestions? How we can better adapt to future pandemics or future situations?
One thing I'll mention is a learning for me and my organization during this time was that some of what students craved was collaboration with other students, right? When you send everybody home, they're lonely and they don't get to work together on projects. And so to have, we have idea accelerators that we run so that students work together to design a system that they think will solve a need. And engineer the biology to do it. So I think that has been, in addition to training people's hands, you also have to train their minds with professional skills, and collaboration is one of those, right? An ability to work towards a goal together and meet a deadline and all those things. So I think that sort of learning works even during pandemic times. It just is not, it's a transition. So it I think could position us well to handle more crises if we had more sort of a skill set or a more robust muscle for helping students with collaborative learning, whether they're present in the classroom or working remotely.
Mm-hmm. And take advantage of the fact that now we can make it more than just local collaboration. It could be national, it could be global, and expand on that and have students work across the globe on that. And then they get to see other people like themselves and different, but value all of them at the same time. I think that could be really beneficial. And policy should support that idea.
I echo that sentiment as well, Linnea, and Teshell and everybody about the idea of globalization for some of these approaches. For academics, it's very clear that in this response to COVID and how we're dealing with these challenges, there's a lot more that opens up for us. What folks aren't aware of that I think is something to think about, because we all use Amazon, we all use these different resources and such. But these companies that will hire our students coming in from these STEM fields, 30% of their business now needs to be located outside of the United States. I mean, that's kind of one of those ballpark figures to think about how to keep a company afloat, right? So our industries are relying on global markets. So this globalization of thought, I think, is a really important aspect to raise. So I have an audience question for you. So this comes from one of our participants, and this person says, I am wondering about how the student support system, parents, families, friends, can and should be involved in the K-12 to college support structure for first generation students? What tools and knowledge do we give, and how do we give it to the parents and communities who want to support the students, even if they aren't in STEM themselves and may not understand or personally relate to what the current labor market demands are? I think that's a great question. Linnea.
So I just want to say one thing I realized, especially first generation, that whenever I involved my students in poster sessions, I invited the community, and I especially invited their families so they could see what their wives, because I had wives who are in my biotech program, and I wanted their family to see what their mother or wife was doing now in biotechnology. And what's really interesting, by doing that, it was very informal, and they got to see what all the other students were doing too, and they were able to ask questions. So even if they didn't understand the science right off the bat, they had that opportunity, all of them, to learn about it at the same time. So when you do poster events, think about inviting the entire family. When you do career days, invite the whole family. And I encourage my students to take home information to their parents, to their families, and share it. In fact, I used to give exercises for students to take home to Thanksgiving and share with all of their family at Thanksgiving. You know, it happened to be in genetics. But I mean, you have to involve the parents at the same time that you involve the students. And support systems are really important. And I think we need to expand more on them, because I have so many single mothers in my program, and I have to admit, I did this one time. I let a single mother bring in her daughter for 2 classes because she didn't have childcare, and I wanted her in class. So don't tell my bosses I did that. But now my school offers childcare, but it's not big enough. There's more out there, and childcare is unbelievably expensive.
It certainly is. Any comments that Natalie, Teshell, would you like to make any comments? Because I have one last question.
I would just add that, you know, I've done exactly the same what Linnea has done. And one of the other things is really trying to get students to do STEM at home with their parents. So that's another.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Yeah, so I get them to do that a lot. So it might mean, you know, creating a tip sheet that's a little bit more parent friendly, and encourage them to do it and challenge them. So I build challenges for the children to do with their family.
Thanks, Teshell. And Ashley, thank you for that question. I think we have enough time here for just one more question I want you to think about very carefully. And this is, I'm going to frame it a little bit differently. And if you had an audience with a top policymaker, and you had just a few sentences to express your concern about something that you think demands attention, top priority, what would you say? Where would you go with that? What would you identify as that top priority for this policymaker? Natalie's got one. Yeah. Okay, Natalie.
I would say biology is engineerable, and we need to teach people to engineer biology the same way we teach people that they need to learn to read, they need to learn to do basic math, they need to learn that they can engineer biology to solve real-world challenges. Core competency. It has to be taught alongside everything else.
I want to work for you. No, I mean, as a biologist, as a person coming in from that background, that is exactly, that's core to me. Linnea,
I think I would
talk
about, you know, STEM and it being a problem. It solves problems. You know, I feel a lot of students don't recognize that connection when we're talking about careers. So they're just thinking like a STEM career, okay, maybe Albert Einstein in a lab, but as was said earlier, you know, you can have pretty hair and all these other stuff and be in STEM. So I think it's really just get into the thing that STEM solves problems. We need different talents in the pipeline to help us solve problems.
Thanks, Teshell. And Linnea, wrap us up. What would you say to this legislator if you can influence their way of thinking or introduce something that they need to know about? I'm sorry, Linnea, I think you're on mute.
I would tell them two things. One is everything around us is science. So how can you deny science? Math, we invented math so we could understand science. You know, everything in our kitchen is science. Flavors are science. There's nothing a part of our life that isn't science. The clothes we wear, it's all science. But, you know, one thing I worry about to policymakers and everybody else is that we become very compliant or very comfortable in our lives, and we don't put ourselves into the lives of the students that we're educating or the people out there. So I would tell the policymaker, you really need to think about what it's like to be that other person before you essentially create policy and realize what they face. Because we come up with all these support systems in school. Tutoring is good, but I know for my students that if they don't have enough food or they're dealing with other situations at home, they're not going to be able to learn very well. So policy has to take that into account. But first and foremost, everything is science out there. Remember that.
Well, I want to express my appreciation to Linnea and Natalie and Teshell for sharing your wisdom and your knowledge and your input on all of these questions. I know that we're running thin on time here, and I want to turn it back over to Nicole so that we can wrap this up and get some more insights into what's coming down the road. My thank you for this opportunity to moderate and to hear such great responses and to share with the community that is logged in here. So thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to the JSPG and to Eris.
Thank you so much, Tom. This was an excellent panel. Thank you all. We want to thank our moderator, thank our panelists for this excellent discussion today, and thank all of you for joining us today. We also would like to thank Sigma Chi and Eris for partnering with us on this event, and to our JSPG team that constantly works behind the scenes. We really want to thank them as well, specifically Sahil Mehta, our Senior Director of Communications and Media Relations, and our CEO, Adriana Bankston. Please feel free to reach out to us directly if you have any questions about the call for papers for this special issue. And we also encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel to keep up with these upcoming events. We're going to place the link in the chat for those events as well, and also going to share with you the flyer for those events as well. So you can just see the dates that are coming up for that. How quickly I can do this. All right. And so with that, as you can see here, we have an upcoming event on October 15th, where we have a webinar that's focused on higher education. And that'll be moderated by Toby Smith, one of JSPG's governing board member and also a leader within AAU. Following that, we'll have a webinar on October 22nd on career and technical education at community colleges, moderated by JSPG's Senior Advisor, Shaylin Jatashi. And then just to let you all know that all of these webinars are at the same time, Fridays, 3 p.m. to 4:15 p.m. Eastern time. So there shouldn't be any confusion about the time. And please let us know if you have questions about that. Following these webinars, we'll also be having a workshop, a writing workshop in November to help prepare authors who are interested in submitting to this special issue. So we look forward to receiving all your submissions for the issue, and thank you for joining us again, and have an excellent weekend.